it comes down, I guess, in my view, to that very simple desire to be fulfilled again, to be happy and to know that we're valuable, not over someone else, not powerful more than someone else, not valuable more than someone else or less than someone else, but that we are part of something that's immensely and infinitely and immediately complete, fulfilled. With that in place, the rest is just, it's basically going about your daily life. It's like, well, what are you going to do with your day? You're alive. Why not just do something that feels reasonably supportive to the community? Because the rest is taken care of. And so I really believe that if we are to enter a business consciously, number one prerequisite is to know what our motivation is, and to investigate very sincerely, what am I lacking inside? What has my culture told me that I'm missing?
Hello and welcome to Curious Ones podcast by Yandara. I'm Yael Ginsberg, the host of the podcast, a yoga and meditation teacher and philosophy lover. Each week you will hear eye-opening interviews with the different teachers of the Yandara Yoga Institute, located in beautiful Baja, Mexico, along with other teachers that pass through here. This life-changing knowledge, shared through authentic, heartfelt communication, will help you live a happier, more fulfilled, and connected life. Let's dive in. I'm so happy to have my teacher with me here again today, Christopher Perkins. Christopher is the co-founder of Yandara. His father, and his brother co-founded Yandara over almost 20 years ago, and they've been teaching ever since. There were so many subjects I wanted to speak with Christopher about. So today I thought it could be interesting to speak about Yandara as a business, because it is a place for teaching yoga, but actually it is a business, and a pretty big business with many, many trainings every year. So many people coming through here. And I thought it could be a really interesting subject to speak about. So welcome, Christopher, to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. Really. Yeah. We are a family from the beginning. So the father, the two sons, my mom also is here. Mm-hmm. It's funny when you say Yandara is a business, it's true. And yet I don't necessarily see it like that. That is a necessary view to take, because there are a lot of moving parts and a lot of responsibilities, and their expenses, and their, the way that we show up in the world, hopefully as a model for businesses that are conscious, I think is a really important example and responsibility. It's from the beginning simply us doing and living how we want to experience the daily life. And I remember, about 20 years ago, my dad said, "What's your ideal day look like? When you wake up, what do you do?" And one of the things I said was to be in silence till after breakfast. And I said, "Okay, and what are you going to do during those silent hours?" "Well, some yoga, be in nature, have some fruit, and be, basically letting my morning set the tone for the rest of the productive day." So, and so on and so forth. All these little specific details started to come out of this simple checking in and knowing myself. What do I want? What's going to serve the highest version of myself? What's going to strengthen the values or strengthen the qualities that I want to be as an example in the world, or at least some support. So this process has never been actually about creating a business. It wasn't from the beginning. It was just to gather intentionally. And little by little, more and more people wanted to come. And little by little, more and more people wanted to learn. And slowly, the evolution led to actually one of the founders of Yoga Alliance heard about us, and she came and she said, this should be a training experience. This should be like a legitimate structure for people to come down and learn what the traditional lifestyle of yoga looks like. And so from that point, it became much clearer that we had to organize and systematize and create the whole curriculum that you know now to be the Yandara Yoga teacher training. So it's a very natural, very organic process for knowing ourselves, for strengthening what it is that we might need. Because I'm very aware that I have challenges in terms of weaknesses to certain situations. Like, for example, I'm a Taurus, and I don't know if you know about Taurus, like astrologically, they're very much about the physical world, very much about creating space, very much about enjoying space and senses, comfort, all the pleasures of life, everything that comes along with the material world. So I watch myself when I go into like a big city, for example, after a few weeks of being in the city, even though I've been spending maybe months in nature or whatever, I start to look around at the things like, oh yeah, I could see having one of those. Maybe I need a new one of those. I have one perfectly fine, but that one's a little bit nicer. So this consumer materialistic part of me, from being raised in the US or having just the culture of consumer mentality around, puts me to be predisposed to consumption, basically. And what I noticed is, because of that, I have decided to not live so close to the things that I would say, powerless to. Like, if you were to talk to an alcoholic who's recognized that they have a problem, first thing they do is recognize, I'm actually powerless to that. No judgment on the alcohol, no judgment on the object of my dysfunctional relationship. It's my responsibility to manage that within myself, whether that be not go into the bar, not even walk down the street where the bar is that I frequent, or maybe not even hang out with some of the people that I have sort of historically, gotten drunk with or whatever. And I'm just using this as an analogy because it's really common that people see alcoholism as a real issue. What people don't commonly see as a real issue is, in the business world, this mindset of the more I can get, the happier I'll be. The more I can accumulate, and the greater either status, wealth, position, stack of information or experiences, whatever gathering. People don't usually see that as like a mental disability or an instability in the character. So I had to take responsibility for that within myself. There aren't that many places that you can go to, and like Alcoholics Anonymous, for example, is all over the world. There's not a lot of places that that you can call Consumers Anonymous. It's just a cultural norm that everyone does it. Everyone consumes way beyond our means, and
it is normal.
It's normalized, and it's not just normalized; it is idealized, and it is systematically built into the cultural conditioning so that we continue to consume.
The newest iPhone coming out every few months.
All these things. There's a brilliant marketing strategy behind every major corporation.
And the whole organization of marketing really designed to play on our natural human needs in order to get us to buy more and more and more.
Right.
Yeah.
So what you're basically touching into is, I think, one of the most insidious, factors that we as a culture have to deal with, which is that from a very young age, we are taught that, having enough. So consuming is the main point, and business usually is set up in order to create wealth. Usually, if you look at the corporate model, for example, it's to provide basically a return from its investors. So a conscious business is set up hopefully by people, ideally, that aren't motivated by gathering more things, but rather motivated by raising consciousness in a way that will reduce the overall misunderstanding of the consumer mentality, which is that it will ultimately bring happiness. Like the more stuff, the more, whatever the more means we have means that we can buy more, means we can be more happy. This obviously comes from a very deep misunderstanding, like the deepest. Because if we don't know who we are, which is infinite, which is abundance beyond measure, then any marketing strategist will be able to, touch into our lack of self-knowledge and say, you're missing something. And I have exactly what you need.
Yes.
And it's called this, and this is the,
Yeah, and if you don't have it, you won't be happy.
Exactly.
You won't be accepted. You won't have value.
Right. You won't be able to stack up against the Joe on either side of you or whoever. So there's a lot beneath this idea of a conscious business, which is the individuals who are showing up within that structure have, I would say, a prerequisite to know themselves as fulfilled and abundant without material gain, without an idea that above and beyond basic human needs, it doesn't create a lot more happiness. I think there are even studies that are showing that, say a standard, income of, I'm not sure what it is in the US, maybe 70, 80,000 or something like that for, no, I don't remember, maybe 100,000 for a family, some number. It doesn't really matter. But the point is that there are numbers that show above which point don't actually gain much happiness.
Yeah.
So there's a pretty steep curve that creates from poverty and fear about where the next meal is coming from. And then it gets to a certain point where, okay, I have insurance covered. I know that I can provide food and clothing, have shelter, things like that. Depending on which standard of living you're finding yourself in, that changes dramatically in what that looks like. So if you're living in a situation, there's going to be a lot more pressure to have a X as your basic standard of living. And so I'm talking about this because that's usually what motivates people's desire for a business. To be in business is to do what? Generally is to create an income, generally to provide us the means to buy more stuff in order to be happy.
Well, that's one approach.
Exactly. That's like the general sort of, the approach, if you think of like the common motivation would be to provide income.
Yeah.
And what would that income be promising? Fulfillment and happiness. Because I can either have this X, Y, and Z. Yes.
I can argue with that because I think that money is part of nature. It is energy, part of our existence. It's energy. We can't say that wanting to have money is always determined by, or like the motivation is always to be fulfilled from the money, because money is just part of our existence. You need money to have a house. You need money to have food. So it's kind of part of our basic needs. So to have a business, for me, doesn't necessarily mean that I need the money for my fulfillment, but it's
to be happy. I mean, exactly. And maybe I didn't express that clearly when I said to be happy. I mean to be free of suffering. And when you say I need a house, I'm saying that because if you don't have a house, you'll be suffering.
Yeah.
You're saying if I don't have food, why? Well, because you'll be suffering if you don't have food. So when I say motivated by being happy, I mean free of suffering, basically. Not to say that we have any judgment on that. Literally none. It's literally what people do, unfortunately, that gets extrapolated or kind of, sent out into this impossible vision of actual happiness, of actual and lasting fulfillment, which we can see in the eyes of someone who's never had a house. We can see it in someone who's, has 10 houses. It doesn't matter. Has really very, very little to do in the material world and much more to do with the interior world. And when we can recognize that particular subtle difference between looking for it in the environmental situation, that sort of reflective, yes, now I've arrived, now I've got it, now I've finally met that, success level. If we can see that it is a bit of a dangling carrot, and it's really the way that the gross domestic product is in terms of the GDP of any country. It's built on each person striving very hard to create this. Basically, it's a worldwide status, of who's producing consuming and basically consuming, who's consuming the most stuff. And so it puts us at a certain place in the world economy and status and things. So that trickles down through the policies and all the things that set us up in our society and in whatever structure we might be finding ourselves. So the way I look at it is, obviously, energy is in the form of money sometimes. Put my energy in, maybe I get money back, maybe I get food back, maybe I get housing, maybe it's whatever, it's energy. So if at the end of the day we feel good about the energy exchange and we've put in, some honest work, we've gotten an honest and reasonable amount back, and we feel like there's a clear balance, then those are the needs of the outer world being met. We can feed ourselves and everything. The only issue that I see arising is when we project that little bit of deeper happiness, that sense of fulfillment onto the extra income. That's, I think, an issue, because as soon as we start gathering more and more, that becomes more and more of an issue for us to deal with. And then, of course, the culture sets us up for gathering more stuff, or at least more responsibilities, and And you could say, well, yes, there's a lot of greatness and a lot of freedom to be had in, having more money. At the same time, potentially, if we've projected fulfillment or happiness onto that, then immediately comes the fear of losing it. Immediately we're living in a subconscious state of, well, what if I don't? What if I can't? What if the market crashes? What if I, all these things could be under the surface of our skin, unconsciously contracting our energy field, unconsciously limiting our flow of pure consciousness, which, as far as I can see, has always been the aim of activity. Deepest, most subtle desire comes from the desire for self-knowledge, desire to know the infinite and vast power and fulfillment that we are, beyond our ego, beyond our idea of self. So, yeah, it's way down there.
Wow.
And if one has established a clear intention to know oneself, first and foremost, the practices, the dedication, whatever it looks like, I believe that it doesn't matter how much income really is moving through their daily life. The focus is on the source of fulfillment, which has never been the conditions of the outer world, except for basic needs. And once those basic needs are met, the rest is just basically fantasy projected onto, based on conditioning.
Yeah. I find it very interesting that you mention that really the important emphasis is on the intention behind what you're doing. So if you're doing it because you want the money to give you some sort of definition of who you are in society, so something that is external to you, or is the motivation for a business to provide service or to share values or to teach something that has been beneficial to you and you think maybe it could be beneficial to someone else. Right. Yes. And I think it's important and interesting to talk about the fact that a lot of times we take things that are external to us. So let's say money, or it could be also the way that we look or kind of a status that we have. And we make that, we make that the definition of our value and who we are in the world. So could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, you just said it beautifully, that we add a value. We really do add a value to our own existence based on that manifestation of the outer situation, or the appearances based on our clothes, based on our status, based on recognition, based on number of followers on Instagram, based on whatever societal pieces are valued. If
Fame.
yeah, exactly. It comes down, I guess, in my view, to that very simple desire to be fulfilled again, to be happy, and to know that we're valuable, not over someone else, not powerful more than someone else, not valuable more than someone else or less than someone else, but that we are part of something that's immensely and infinitely and immediately complete, fulfilled. With that in place, the rest is just, it's basically going about your daily life. It's like, well, what are you going to do with your day? You're alive. Why not just do something that feels reasonably supportive to the community? Because the rest is taken care of. And so I really believe that if we are to enter a business consciously, number one prerequisite is to know what our motivation is, and to investigate very sincerely, what am I lacking inside? What has my culture told me that I'm missing? And if I'm not sure, then of course, meditation, introspection, getting some reflective dialogue going with someone who you trust, to ask questions and to see what's actually motivating this desire. And you'll see in big, sort of big names, or often a very idealized or idolized person who has been very successful, really, really motivated. I think if you look closely, you'll see that there's a part of them that maybe wasn't given the support, the love, the affirmation when they were younger, and so it produced a certain personality trait. I talk about this often because it's so ingrained in our society to be striving above, to get better than, and it's taught at a very young age in school. If I get an A, I get a gold star. The person who got a B doesn't get one. I'm the one that gets the attention. I'm the one that gets a pat on the back. I'm the one that gets positive affirmation. And so it's built into the society.
And just the grading, just grading
Absolutely.
You compared to your peers.
It's very, very deeply ingrained in us to become an individual that's better than the person beside us. And if we can't get ahead of them, then we're going to go down. That's sort of the basic, view, I think, that has put us into a very vulnerable position.
And also judged compared to something very standardized, and not taking into account that each one of us is different. We all have different strengths. We all have different ambitions, different learning styles. It really standardizes our society. And I've heard it spoken about in terms of the Industrial Revolution, that it was kind of the extension of making us feel that we need to be uniform and the same to each other in order to be good workers, and not encouraging expression and creativity and individuality and all of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, the Industrial Revolution hit hard on our culture. I think we can look back and pretty easily see massive shifts in health, well-being, sleep patterns, family values, movements from more to more urban centers, quickly packing in more higher density populations.
Is changing now.
Yes, we're finally reversing
COVID,
it. Exactly. So the swing is happening. People are returning to a more spacious living situation, often because it's felt. This collective, the density of population is a pretty high stress situation. So, and what I'm doing here, and we're going to circle back now to this business, the business that I'm part of, Yandara. What I'm motivated by is that when I look inside myself for how I'll feel, I know that death is the only inevitable thing. Not even my next breath is guaranteed, so I'm going to die. And I like to think about, what is it that I will be filled with when I die? And I recognize that I'm not a child anymore. And as children, we're fulfilled by getting. We're fulfilled by receiving what we need from our parents and society and culture. Hopefully some very nourishing and wholesome things. But as adults, we're quite the opposite. We're fulfilled by being communally aware and being supportive to others. I've used this analogy in teaching because it's so obvious. How do you feel when you hold the door for someone just one moment holding the door for someone, getting out of our own selfish or self-absorbed mode of I need to do this, and just expanding our view of the world enough to include this human. They have 2 bags, the door's open, the kid's in the stroller crying. Oh, I have 2 hands that are free. Well, I did when I put my phone down. So I can hold the phone, or I can hold the door and the phone probably, but put the phone down, hold the door, and there's a moment of magic that happens. It doesn't matter if someone videos it and hashtags it, random acts of kindness. There's something innate that wakes up inside of us, and that's, I would say, the evolutionary reward. The reward that's built in to say, that's actually a really important activity. What you just did is going to strengthen society as a whole. It's going to strengthen humanity as a whole. It's going to spread very quickly as a positive momentum if you do more of that. And that shifts us from the limited view of the child, which is, give me, what can I get, to how much I have to give. Not from a place of martyrdom, not from a place of false service, not from a place of thinking I should, although we might practice generosity as a way to loosen our grip on some selfish, activities of just being whatever. But generally, I think we feel good just by doing something that's generous. And that is so key to see in a moment of truth. Nothing's missing. There's really nothing missing. We're just holding the door for someone. Life is, what else is there? We could die in that moment and nothing's missing. If we are really paying attention, those moments are everywhere. Those moments are every single day. Those moments are infinite, really, where we can simply be present, respond to a need, without some egoic sense that, oh God, I'm the savior of that person. Oh, I held the door for them and now they can. It's nothing to do with that. The fact is, it just feels right. And we can honor that. It's below the neck. It's not an intellectual thing. If we can move down and honor that as our motivation, making a business is a no-brainer. You just do what you know to be supportive to your neighbors. You provide a service. You provide something that is going to fill a gap, fill a void. And hopefully it's something that you can sleep well at night with, knowing that you're not part of the problem, part of the solution.
I think that's really beautiful what you said, because it really takes us away from looking at just what can I personally gain, and takes us into this more like a bigger view of humanity. And there's also something very important there, because a lot of times I heard people speak about doing something for someone else as a selfish act because it makes me feel good. And you kind of took it from a different perspective, that it's actually evolutionary. It's part of our ingrained in us as a human need to protect other people in order to have our whole humanity survive and thrive. And
right, which is the truest form and most appropriate form of self-serving, because we're connected to everyone. We are part of everything, and if we can act accordingly, we will feel infinitely fulfilled and immediately satiated. Like, that's actually our birthright. And we can trust that, though it's not taught to us. It has always been available as an adult. So I think we can explore little bits of that, and maybe at some point we just trust it completely and go for it.
This oneness mentality. Hey, I'm quickly interrupting the episode to extend an invitation. If you are interested in deepening into any of the subjects we talk about on the podcast, we offer many different experiences on our beautiful grounds here in Baja, Mexico. From 9-day modules such as sound healing and yoga nidra, to breath and meditation, as well as 200 or 300-hour yoga teacher trainings, and many different shorter retreats. Check out our website, yandara.com, to see all the information about the different experiences. Let's get back to the episode. When we create a business, answering somebody's need in the world, giving value to somebody, there is a possibility that we gain some sort of power. and some sort of maybe even fame. And, being a teacher, there is this position of people looking up to you. And also something that can come from it is also financial abundance. So I think I would like to ask you, maybe, how do you view that in terms of getting these external validations for something that you do from internal point of view, and how do you relate to that and not get attached to that in terms of, because it's very easy to get lost in that, right? You start getting a lot of followers on Instagram or something like that because you provide a need or answer a need or provide value to someone. And you do get, some sort of fame and maybe monetary success. And how do you view that in terms of not getting lost in that?
Yeah, I think that looking back, there's some classic catchphrases like, money is the root of all evil, and things like that aren't true, obviously. But there is some truth to be said in that ultimate power is ultimately, corrupting, things like that. So I think there's a human vulnerability there, where if we, as a society, put someone on a pedestal who seems to want to aggrandize themselves, then we are, in a way, supporting a neurotic sort of misunderstanding of what humankind is about. And a little bit of a societal gift that I got from living in Sweden was this concept of lagom. And lagom means not too much, not too little. And in society, what that looks like is, collectively, if we see someone whose presentation of their wealth or of their whatever seems to be in order to build themselves up. So, for example, being very flashy, or making it a point to demonstrate their own, gifts or wealth, unnecessarily, like it's just about showing off or whatever. That is literally seen as like a sad moment for them. It's like, oh gosh, hopefully this person can get some help. They've lost it. They missed the mark. They don't know themselves. They've lost their center. Truly, it is embarrassing. It's like, literally, it's like, ooh, that's embarrassing that person is so disconnected from their own fulfillment, their own deep self, that a performance of demonstrating and gathering wealth and having to prove basically it's proving an insecurity there, or the disconnection from self, by being motivated in some way other than to be communally aware. To be self-aggrandizing is sort of a mental distortion, you might say, thinking that I'm not as powerful as I am. It's just that I don't know myself. I'm infinitely powerful, as you are. But we don't know that. We're disconnected. And so we try to use other inappropriate means to establish or reestablish some sense of love, inner connection, or loving ourselves, or whatever you want to call it. So that's the way my teachers have demonstrated and modeled it to me. When you say, like, if someone's praising you or you're getting a lot of likes or fame and things like that, my teachers, who I pass any value that I share, is like internally, it just goes through me and to my teachers. I feel so honored and so blessed by their undying kindness and love, like this unwavering. And if anything that I'm sharing has a positive benefit, 2 thumbs up. And if someone says, "Great job, Christopher," like, "Thank you, you're doing such an amazing job," I'm okay with that. Basically, because I'm not taking it personally. I'm not saying like, "Oh yes, I did a great job." There's nothing and yes, I'm a human being. It's not something I've mastered. There are moments where I feel like, "Oh, thank you, God, I needed to hear that." Although my endeavoring to know myself leads me very clearly to not take that personally. It's a way that they are strengthening themselves It's a way that they're expanding themselves to say thank you. Even that, like, for me to say thank you, it's not about you. Yes, okay, you could say it's about you, but actually it's about me waking up to my abundance through gratitude as an emotion, which actually melts ego. It's a very beautiful process of getting grateful for something. So when someone says thank you, I'm like, yes. I'm like, internally I'm saying, yes, good job. Like, you're waking up to your power now. It's not really about me. It's about that they're maturing internally and they're gaining a lot of confidence to expand beyond self-serving mentality. And if it does have to do with a particular teaching or a particular structure that I've offered, then I can give thanks to the source and just say, like, wow, I feel honored that could come through, like, great. I feel blessed. And at the end of the day, if insecurity bubbles up and we start craving in a way that, it just kind of dilutes, it can just dilute the value of what we're offering. If it's motivated by that. But if it does happen, we can just remember, come back to our personal practice, reestablish, who am I? What am I? Is that going to add value to me? Is my personality somehow telling me anything about myself? Not really.
Yeah. I think it's important, though, to also mention that it's possible to have fame, to have some sort of status, and do it from the right motivations, right?
Of course. Yeah. Well, in order to be effective in greater numbers, you might find yourself comfortable in that role. That you can reach a lot more people if a lot more people know about you.
Right.
And that's a beautiful opportunity. I was very, very happy to be able to spend time with the Dalai Lama, and his manifestation of fame was completely different to what I was taught when I was younger and growing up, of what one does with that power, how one would either take responsibility for it or sort of use that as a value about one's own sort of self in the world. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but watching him, there wasn't an ego thing. He wasn't taking credit for any of the fame. It was very clear that he was simply in a position where he could make an effect that was farther reaching than someone else. And he was in that position because of his ability to be clear, to know himself, to stand in his peace, in his truth. And watching, like, I'll give you an example. I was walking into the place where I was going to meet his people. And this is like, name dropping here. I was hanging out with his entourage. I was young, 20, 25 or something like that. And I had gotten this position to cook for him and his people, 6 of his closest kind of travel crew. And I walked in, and the elevator doors open. It was just him, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. My mind's like, oh my gosh. Yeah. But before I could even have a thought, he bowed his hands and dropped lower than me. The doors open, and his internal response was humility and, like, to explain the feeling that came over me would be like, there was no way that I could have humbled myself faster than he humbled himself in the face of another being, another reflection of the divine. Like, I felt like I was playing catch up. Like, oh my gosh, like, how can I be as reverent as this human being? Like, it's just incredible to see the humility and the beauty and the grace, that he must have been experiencing, to see everyone as having been his mother, which is actually built into the Buddhist teachings, especially in the Mahayana tradition, that if everyone has been my mother, based on the idea that energy is neither created nor destroyed, it's just changed its forms. If we're all energy, we're all built on, the model of the atom, which is energy and emotion. That form has been changing infinitely, and he shows up in a body, and he looks around and he says, wow, everything's already been here for many, 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 many eons. Yeah. Taking form of mother, child, mother, child, mother, child, mother, child. So everyone has been my mother at some point. It doesn't matter if it's true. The movement of him in the world is showing such power of love and humility, such service, such effect, without ever having to become the aggressor against someone. He's not looking at anyone as the culprit that's causing the suffering. He's literally just paying attention to where the suffering is rooted and moving towards freeing that misunderstanding. And so his movement, his need to be seen is not from a need to be seen or recognized. His movement of being seen by many people is motivated by a very simple desire to be of more effect, more positive effect, because he knows himself very deeply and understands the root of suffering is not figuring it out. It's moving from being lost in thought to being and living in reverence and seeing others as having been my mother. And how could I repay your kindness? How could I repay your kindness for holding me, for carrying me, for basically giving me life? So he's seeing everyone literally through that lens. There's no sense of him gathering value on himself. It's just not even a factor.
Wow, I love that concept, because we in the spiritual community hear a lot about seeing the other as yourself and that we're all the same. But part of the human nature is to create the separation. It's just like automatic in us. And if you look at this person that might be kind of bugging you or that you have a falling out with, and you look at them as your mother, then it makes it a lot easier to really let go of the differences and see the similarities that we have. Amazing. Yeah.
So how does that circle back to being in a conscious business? Well, practically speaking, in order for one's passion or one's ability to serve others to be made available, there must be a platform, there must be a location, there must be an actual place, a facility to host the experience.
Nowadays it can be online.
Well, yeah, but you will have to pay for your
facility online, right?
Advertising or whatever it might be part of it. And maybe I come from an old school view of it really comes from a place of service. I understand that particularly in the sort of female archetype, there is this underlying pattern of being overly of service or only being a martyr, basically. That's kind of an out of balance version of being kind and of service, where we must recognize our own place in that service. So to serve our self-knowledge, serve our particular wholeness, serve our health, our well-being, in order to be more effective. And the way I look at this is like the model of the solar system, where the sun is the center point and it's still and it's stable and it's manifesting and radiant. And it is the reason that all the other planets are in perfect harmony and orbit around it. And the size of that center, the size of that particular stillness, has the power to affect the reach of its size. So appropriately, X mass of stillness would reach X times 10 million in terms of gravity. So gravity from the sun is a massive effect on all the planets. And it's based on the container of that stillness. Within oneself, if stillness is not found, the effect will not reach very far. It doesn't matter how much appearance, how much sort of sparkles and whatever, drama, whatever activity might actually happen, the effect won't penetrate if it's not, something substantial from a place of stillness. It might look like a lot's happening, but it won't actually directly affect the root of suffering, which is not what we think it is. It's not a lack of things. It's a lack of knowledge, self-knowledge.
Self-knowledge, yeah.
And that self-knowledge has everything to do with humans successfully experiencing themselves.
Yeah. Well, how do you feel about the concept that, well, I believe that if you kind of follow your dharma, your path, and what you're meant to do in this world, then you are supported financially as well. And
But what does that mean? What do you project onto financial support? Like, what does that mean to you? If you have financial support, you are...
Well, you're able to afford a house and food and to provide for your kids what they need,
Right.
just supported in terms of what you need, let's say, on that level. And I find it very interesting because there are people who are very financially successful, but they do it with the intention of some of them even hurting other people. And for me, it's kind of like a paradox. How does the universe support that? And because I see my job as a person trying to kind of establish myself in the world as in to follow the path, do good in the world, and then I will receive good, right? Giving good out will bring good in. But you also see the opposite. You see people that harm other people, that put themselves over other people or try to get more benefits for their personal lives on top of the harming of other people, and yet they are financially successful and they might have status.
So just to take a moment, you're equating financial status with good, finances with good. Receiving good, you said, receiving good when you do your
When
work.
you see money as energy, when you see money as support, I see money as support, right? I give out good, and that's one of the ways that the universe supports us.
But what is that actually giving us? It's giving us a place to live, food, and hopefully someplace in society to be able to exchange. I think it's really super slippery to use money and good synonymously, because it is a very, very slippery slope. It's a very slippery slope if they get equated directly. Energy is energy, for sure. But what we project onto money is the most important thing to recognize. What am I projecting onto that financial good, or that, well, ultimately I'm projecting a very, very deep sense of fulfillment, peace. I'm projecting a sense that I am able to do what I need to do to feel fulfilled and die with a smile on my heart.
Right.
Okay. Unfortunately, we don't necessarily see it so clearly. We think of having a nice place and having nice clothes and having a nice car and having things like that. So it's very, very important, I think, to recognize how deeply we're conditioned to think that all the shit that gets consumed for us to have a evolved modern society hasn't actually demonstrated to be intelligent. It's not showing to be an intelligent way of being. In terms of the amount of stuff or the level of accumulation of goods that we see as, whatever the status quo is. It has never made sense from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, for sure, to try to sustain that at any scale, really, other than maybe back in the day for the royal family. It didn't nearly deplete the resources like the way we are able to, as each one of us tries to act like royalty. Each one of us tries to consume that despicable amount that we have seen in history that royalty would do. This way of living, almost like everything is disposable. Wearing a pair of clothes once or twice and then, or whatever it is. So this mentality is so deeply ingrained that we think it's somehow sustainable or that it's somehow been tested over time, and it really has not. It's a super, super thin sliver of this history of society that shows this extreme consumption mentality. extreme,
Yeah.
not nearly sustainable. We know it's not sustainable, it's destructive, but we have all been taught that within our lifetimes, that this is the way to perceive this, the normal standard. Yes, it may be normal, but it has nothing to do with intelligent, sustainable living.
Right.
So I think it's very, very important to look closely at that piece that we are unconsciously projecting when we say normal living, healthy, normal living. It's not necessarily what's going to work out. That, for example, being able to buy the new phone that you mentioned earlier, that requires a lot of resources to create. Like there's a whole thing going on that we are all part of. I'm not suggesting anyone's to blame. I'm just saying we've all agreed on it. But to get to the root of what's actually going on is to see that we're misunderstanding a long and healthy life of society. We are very short-sighted in the way that we are expecting the daily standard to look. We know that, I'm not saying anything we all don't know. We're watching society chew itself out of a planet, because of its incessant desire to consume. It's just not working. No one would argue that. It's literally not working for anybody. So this idea of having a standard and thinking that that's ultimately somehow okay to kind of, believe in this sustainable thing. It's a tricky one. It's a very tricky situation we're in. It's a very short-sighted view of what the results of your altruistic activity should bring you. By you being a good person, motivated by service, you have an idea of what should come back, financial, whatever that level is,
Yeah.
And it's just something to be aware of, that expectation or that idea or that condition of the cultural norm has a lot of issues to it that I think are worthy of looking at. And what is it in a spiritual or conscious motivated state that's getting misguided to be just another spiritual consumer, or to use spirituality as another way to consume or something. It's not an easy thing to get our head around, because it's literally in our fibers of our condition as a culture, as a Western culture, that this standard is normal, natural, sustainable, healthy, and expected. It's just not simply the case. It's not sustainable. It's not necessarily healthy. It's very individualistic. It's completely divorced from the intelligence and the sustainability of community living. There's so many factors that have been missed in this model of modern society. And it's really not something that I would recommend subscribing to wholeheartedly and believing that altruistic work should lead to living the standard of an unsustainable society.
Wow, you completely changed what I was thinking of, because you're saying, even before we talk about the people who are gaining wealth from doing things that aren't necessarily good, think about yourself. When you're trying to do something good in order to gain money or gain something that you think is normal, what are your real intentions in that? What are you actually striving to do, and is it actually sustainable and beneficial and communally oriented?
I know. And the people that are doing, like you said, the evil doers who have a lot of power based on their status or financial standing, they'll have to sleep at night. They'll have to take the process of death and rebirth, if that's happening. And through that, maybe they'll start to have more and more responsibility to their place in society if they're not aware, of how much they're affecting the bigger picture. But at the end of the day, pointing the finger has really not, done a lot to actually evolve us. Really those other three pointing back at us, those are the good ones. Those are the ones to pay attention to. How am I participating? How am I part of the solution? And I'm doing my best. Well, I was going to say, I don't suggest I have a great model because I live in a house, like a big, and to be fair, I'll be honest. I lived in a tent for 9 years. Some of those years I wasn't even in a tent, more than 9 years actually.
Wow.
And for very short periods of those 9 years, I would sleep inside or in buildings that were made of lots of material. For the sake of my family who live in Canada and Virginia, who have a fairly normal existence, because it would be weird for me to be sleeping out under this, they wouldn't be comfortable with that. So I'm not going to make them uncomfortable, but I did make a commitment to use less, to live healthily, to live in relationship to nature, to return to which is sustainable, really, which is a world apart from what's normalized. Right. And now I have a partner, and I have responsibility to her, and so I created a structure. I am an artist and a sculptor by trade and by study, so that was fun to create a house, and took 4 years to build it because it was little by little, and I had a great time doing it. But if it goes away tomorrow, that's fine. I have some pride, that I was able to produce that as a person. Yeah, it feels like a work of art for me because but I know that it has nothing to do with me being happy. Literally nothing. In fact, it's a point of stress to maintain it, to clean it, to manage it. I know all that. And I know that even though society taught me that I should have one of those, I don't believe it. I have one, but it has nothing to do with me. And it really, really ultimately has nothing to do with my happiness or fulfillment. If I die without a house, if I die without whatever, then I will be left with the quality of my heart.
Anyway, we don't take these things with us when we die.
Definitely don't take it with us. In fact, the opposite is that when we die, if we are attached to those things keep us in a certain cycle. And our rebirth will be affected dramatically by the pieces that we've identified with as our values or as our sort of crutches for creating value in our life. That could be possessions, it could be status, it could be relationship dynamics, all kinds of things. So knowing ourselves has, at the end of the day, I'd say the most powerful effect on being able to provide the basis for a healthy model of business. Knowing ourselves very, very seriously in terms of who and what we are will show us through that process how we can serve others to know themselves.
So if we talk about making a business and kind of navigating our way in the professional world, you say the first thing we need to know is who we are and
what
connecting.
Motivates us. Exactly.
And then I think another layer of this process is how we are in society, because of what we said. There is the norm. There is what other people are like, even our close family would tell us, our parents, our siblings, our partners maybe, and what we think is the right way to be, and our conditioning kind of as we grow up as part of society. And choosing a path that is maybe different than what we should be doing, in parentheses, is a very scary step to take.
Absolutely. So, the Buddha taught about 3 pillars for stability and success in life. And the pillars are inspired. And second pillar is our technique, our dharma, our path. And the third pillar is community. And so when you're talking about what our sort of ideal business looks like, we can consider, is it inspired? Is it moved? Is it arising within us as something that makes sense in the bigger picture? Is it based on the knowledge that I'm part of and I'm connected to, and it's an interdependent relationship? So inspiration to me is key. And what am I inspired by? Am I inspired by someone who has a big yacht or has a certain standard of living that was taught to be somehow better, even though it makes no sense in the bigger picture? It's not sustainable. It's not responsible for what? I have no idea, would one consume that much, except for basic insecurity or not knowing one's own self.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can see that if we're inspired by someone like really deeply fulfilled within themselves, doing work that makes sense, not out of balance, but doing work that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can have the second one, which is our dharma, our path, our part to play in the life, whatever that looks like. And like you said, kind of doing our part, trusting our path, what lights us up,
Mm-hmm.
what makes sense to us as our gift, as our piece in the puzzle. And the techniques that come along with that are the dharma. It means kind of the path, like your way of doing it. That's where the very practical pieces come in. What do you have to do in terms of getting a certain education to provide a stronger foundation for your service? Maybe perhaps buying, something that will make your offering more accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Your path will be kind of manifesting out of your inspiration. So knowing what inspires you, knowing what lights you up will lead you to the path. And that path will kind of lay itself out in front of us, I think, if we're clear. And then you mentioned the group around us and how to connect and how to not lose sight of our own values, perhaps. And that's the third one, is the community or sangha. So it's, in Buddhist terms, it's Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Awake. So Buddha literally translates as awake. And Dharma, which is the path to it. And then the Sangha, which is the interaction, how we move in our society. And it literally refers to how those people affect us as well. And because we're communal beings, just biologically, we're genetically coded to be part of something, we will be very affected naturally. That doesn't make us weak, it makes us human. It gives us that human component that we are affected by the greater motivation, by the greater value system. So if you're hanging out with a group of people that really values, we're talking about business and maybe creating wealth and things like that. If you're hanging around people who are, or have hung around people that are very motivated by status, wealth, fame, things like that, then naturally we will start to place importance on those things.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we have very strong values within us, those will start to become obscured. They'll literally start to become less and less available to us because of our innate knowing that being part of a group and being accepted by those people has so much more value than us as an individual. It's a very strange phenomenon that we will actually literally start turning down our personal inspiration if it's not accepted and enjoyed and valued by the people around us. So, knowing that power of our community, I personally have chosen to be a little bit more selective about who I spend more hours with. Meaning that I have created circles of intention, because I really want to be affected by people who are interested in intention awareness. What's moving them? What's getting them to do that? And the motivation is so important that I'll share a little story that helps. It's not about the action so much as it is the internal motivation, because that is what we're left with at the end of the day, is the residue from our energetic motivation.
Mm-hmm.
So really quickly, if you imagine two parallel universes, in both of those universes, there's a car that pulls up to a stoplight. And someone comes to the car, opens the door, jumps in the car. There's some ruckus. At the end of the day, in both scenarios, the person grabs a pen and stabs the other person in the throat, takes their wallet, and runs.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. How's that for intensity? We're turning the volume up so you can really hear the level at which this is still true.
Mm-hmm.
So in these two universes, how could that behavior be any different? How could it?
Mm-hmm.
Someone was murdered. They died with a pen in their throat.
Mm-hmm.
So in universe A, we'll call it, person pulls up, the other person opens the door, jumps in the car, and they're motivated by opportunity to gain, opportunity to get. There's a vulnerable situation, the person's distracted, they know that they have a nice car, so they're gonna hopefully find a bunch of money in their wallet, and they run. In the other scenario, and they do end up, running quite a ways, and during that run, they get tired, stop, and then they sit down with themselves and they feel what they feel. So what do you think that person feels?
Bad things for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, there's no way out of this. It's a bad situation. Someone got killed.
Mm.
But now in the other situation, the person who sees the car, notices the person inside is choking, quickly responds as their first aid responder trained, pull the door open, do the best they can to dislodge the food piece that driving while eating, and, not a very smart situation. To the best of their ability, they find a pen, the tracheal bypass or whatever, the pen would provide some air, interim, while the ambulance, could get there. While he takes the wallet, runs, has the information from their license regarding their blood type, everything. They, make a call. They don't know whether the person's going to die yet, but they make the call. The ambulance is on the way. They've done their best. You see, and they've provided the highest degree of service that they could possibly have provided. How do they feel? Of course, it's a traumatic event, but how do you think they actually feel, given the fact that they responded?
Yeah, I think they feel, probably shocked and...
Well, they're trained first aid responder.
Yeah.
This is not an unfamiliar environment.
Okay.
You see, they're trained in this.
They feel good that they helped somebody else. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. They did something, their best, in a moment's notice to reduce suffering. They reassured the person, helps on the way. The person got to relax internally and trust the process. Maybe their death was much more graceful. They're transitioning into and through an act of kindness rather than an act of aggression and self-delusion about, someone getting their wallet and being somehow that'll make them happier. So the point is that the depth of that person's clarity of motivation led them to live in harmony with themselves because they knew that service was possible. And what I mean is the action that comes out of the intention can look very similar. Two people can have, $20 million and, give it away. Depends on who you give it to. Right? One person's intention is to give it to this society or whatever that will in turn boost their own, whatever power. This other one gives it away and produces an incredible ripple effect of an education program throughout a certain population that otherwise wouldn't have had access.
Yeah.
The same actions can be very, very similar, but the internal result is what we're actually paying attention to based on intention. So when you're creating a business model, I want to be very clear. I don't think it matters actually so much how big, how small,
and according to what you're saying, not even what you do, right? You can have a business school, a yoga school, or you can have a beauty company or, clothing. And still, if you do it from service, from intention, then...
Keep in mind, though, the intention also is built in with a level of, I would say, a level of intelligence. If you know yourself deeply enough, you'll be able to be moved efficiently to fulfill that intention. So what I mean to say is, if my intention is, giving away money, say I have a bunch of money and I want to give away money. The intention behind it, as you said, is most important, but giving it away and actually seeing it through to create benefit versus just getting a tax break. So I get to hold more money. It's like you keep more money,
So the intention behind it.
Yeah, the intention behind it, but it's not so simple that it's just, that's a really good example. Just the intention is same action, just intention. And at the same time, our intention will be built in, with this level of seeing. If it's true knowledge of self, we'll be able to see the extent of our actions, how it affects others.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't say that it's only intention. At the end of the day, it is responsibility, of course, to how it flows into the world.
Right.
But most importantly is intention.
Yeah.
Then, of course, that's going to lead us to how responsible we are to that result.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to have a good intention, but also make sure the result is still good and beneficial. Yeah.
To whatever degree is possible,
Mm-hmm.
We are humans. We're here we will consume, we will we will make, it's to whatever degree we can be more responsible to the final outcome. I think that's also very, very important.
Yes.
So
definitely.
And the reason I'm saying that is because we are connected. So number one is number one. And I learned this in first aid responder training, is that if I'm not in a decent place, I won't be a very decent support to the people who really need it.
Mm-hmm.
And so number one is number one. From that, then yes, number two is actually the whole,
mm-hmm.
The big group.
Yeah.
So if my effect on the big group is the opposite of what my motivation intention is, then I have some adjustments.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a human being. I actually have power in the world, so.
I guess it's about the execution, right? Because you might have a good intention, but the execution causes it to not go over well with other people, or not have the response the result that you intended.
Right. So we can adjust, be aware, respond, and
mm-hmm.
hopefully, make stronger choices for next time.
Yeah.
In our business or whatever, in interactions.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I think it's a really good way to reframe how we think about businesses and personal endeavors, thinking about our intention, what is behind it, why are we doing what we're doing, mm-hmm. and then the effect is important, but it isn't the motivator, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I would love also to talk with you about kind of this misconception that I see about being a yoga teacher, because we are a yoga school here in a yoga school. And I think that it's important also to say that because there's a misconception that yoga teachers can't make a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we've been talking about, why you want money. Is money really what you want? Is it good? But I think it's important to have money, and also to speak about, to kind of open the perception for, people who may be wanting to go in that direction and aren't doing it because they think that it's not possible to support yourself while doing that, because I don't really think that's true. So could you speak about that? Yeah,
of course. There are a couple different layers to this. And one is that traditionally these teachings could never be something of a commodity. When I was exposed to these teachings, it was very clear that the teachings are not something you can sell. Mm. The teachings aren't something that have ownership, by any person.
Right.
The teachings are universal. The teachings are freely given. The teachings are not mine to give. I can share, but they're not mine to sell. Having said that, if I don't have food to eat, then I can't really make enough time in my day after working at McDonald's or wherever I had to work to make money to, in order to be able to share these teachings. So it's a balance of, am I just working my day to support a lifestyle, then I'm tired and have to rest and don't have the energy to then support these teachings. So you see, yes, we have to find some way to create a balance. Mm-hmm. My personal path to this was kind of the opposite in some sense, where I was in university, And in order for me to dive deep into these teachings and experiencing and sharing and everything, I took all the pressure off of my standard of living expectation given to me by society by rejecting the idea that I needed to live like society said I should.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided I'm not going to pressurize my teaching with some idea of a standard that is, and I said, I'm going to take a vow of poverty. I literally took a vow of poverty. I had one set of clothing. I had everything that I had on my back. Like that was my whole life.
Wow.
I lived in a tent, lived outdoors, and when I needed money to buy food, I did odd jobs here and there if I needed to, but I actually lived out of donation boxes if I wanted to. And for many years.
Wow, I didn't know this.
Yeah. And I was by choice
Mm-hmm.
drastically reducing my overhead, slashing the pressure that most people keep on themselves when they say, I cannot teach yoga and make a living. Okay. Well, it all depends on what your idea of living is. If you can maintain that standard of living while teaching yoga, great. But if you're putting so much pressure on your teaching to sustain something that isn't actually sustainable ultimately anyway, then where are we? You're teaching yoga. You're stressing about living up to some ideal in your mind based on society, what society has told you should be living at, which we all know isn't going to work out. Mm-hmm. It's just not working out. But hold on, I'm not done yet. But here's the thing.
So much too. Yeah.
I'm telling you from my experience, I didn't put any pressure on my standard of living when I started teaching, because I chose to totally separate that, I would say, potentially disruptive energy while sharing truths. Because being motivated financially has a very destructive, potentially, effect on the purity of sharing. And we can all see this, like I'll give you a really simple example. If I'm motivated by money to teach, to share yoga, or I'm sharing yoga because I want to make money, the aim of yoga is liberation, union, absolute freedom, right? Now, what motivation, if I'm motivated by money, which means you have to keep coming back, right? Mm-hmm. If I'm motivated by money, which means I want you to keep coming back, then where's my motivation to set you free? How does that fit in? How does that make its way into the teaching if I'm motivated by making sure that you are dependent on me for these teachings? All of a sudden it completely dilutes the ultimate and most profound teaching, which is personal freedom and liberation. Yeah. So this is how I approached it, is I don't want to sully these teachings with the insidious pressure of financial standards. If I want to be pure in my approach, I need to make sure it's not motivated financially for me. Yeah. And I maybe have a very high standard for myself based on how I was exposed to these teachings, which is extremely pure level of sharing. My teacher never accepted money for his teachings. He had his own separate job. He was an engineer and a poet. And any money that came into the foundation went to structurally supporting the people, not him, but the people who wanted to gather around the teachings. So the model was set up in such a way that he wasn't corrupted in any way by keeping people around, if that makes sense. Yeah. Which is a very rare model, because usually it's kind of the other way around. Like, I want you to keep wanting my product. Yes. Because then I get whatever. You get the point. It's not such a simple thing. Right. So what I am presenting is philosophically this point to pay attention to is, if these teachings are to be purely presented, how much distortion that is there because of an idea that I need to make money off of this. So be very careful when you're putting too much pressure on your yoga teaching for the purity of the teaching itself, which is liberation, which is personal freedom and manifesting your own power and whatever in the world. So having said that, of course, you could say, well, there's a whole nother thing going on, which is I just want to teach yoga and make enough money so I don't have to work at, a department store. You can do that, absolutely. Your whole approach to it will be very, very important to check and see, how pure are you when you're sharing the teachings? How pure are you when you don't get any students? How much does that take you away from your personal growth? How much pressure are you putting on having to teach so much that the individual healing journey or growth process may not get what it deserves? So these are things to consider. And I recommend, first of all, that if someone's first starting to teach, to don't quit your day job immediately. Let it be a natural process where you gain confidence and strength, and little by little, you gain a following perhaps of people that love your style, but you're not putting your financial pressure on it too much. Everyone has their own path, but to avoid the loss of purity, this is one way you can do it. To have some income, doing some work, teach yoga in a pure way. Maybe, of course, the energy exchange should be there. That way people feel balanced as well. They want to give you some money because that was their energy. You gave your energy, they give their energy. Perfect. And then maybe little by little, as they start to, and you start to stabilize, then you can start providing a deeper experience, a workshop experience, a weekend retreat or a week-long retreat, things where we're talking about creating more income for you to be able to let go slowly of the dependence on that other job that maybe was not as fulfilling or whatever. But, just be respectful of your own process and see how much or how fast is appropriate for you to make that transition. And for me, it was a slash of my expenses in order to make sure that I wasn't inappropriately tainting the teachings or pressurizing and stressfully entering that role. Yeah. So, in my ideal world, the teachings are kept pure. I don't think of the teachings as having some price that you can put a price on the teachings. I don't think of it like that. I think that if there's an exchange, it's in order to provide a living structure, structural support for the providing of the teachings.
Yes.
That's just the
exchange is for what you said, with the structural support of providing the teaching. So if I need to spend my time working in another job in order to support myself, then I can't spread the teaching.
Exactly.
It's really hard for me though to relate to what you said. I mean, of course I relate to it and I see that as kind of the ideal.
Exactly. An ideal.
But it's really hard for me to see that because I do like having nice things. I want to live in a comfortable place. Right now I'm living in a tent, but that's really different for me. And it's temporary, it's not how I would like to live long term.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to kind of put into words how I'm relating to what you said, because I love the idea of keeping the purity of the teachings and not charging money for these pure intentions and knowledge that is in mine. Even somebody else shared it to me and I'm just passing it on. And still, what you did is very unique. Not a lot of people are going to do that, right? Go and take a vow of poverty and release all of expectations and expenses. And actually it's kind of takes you out of society in a way, because can't entertain people when you don't have a place. It's so vastly different than lifestyle of just
Actually, the groups we were entertaining were larger than what we're entertaining now sometimes. Believe it or not. The gatherings that happened in that relationship to nature and to using, the sky as our ceiling and the earth as our floor. That was actually the temple. That was actually the studio. And you'd be surprised how many people benefited from gathering around that very simple, very humble, returning experience. which is, I believe, one of the foundations of misguided attention these days, is the disconnection from our nature, which obviously can be regained and reclaimed in proximity to real nature. We're modeling our disconnection by our disrespect for society, our disrespect for each other, and all of the planet, of course, because we don't know our relationship to nature. So this vow of poverty that I took, I don't want you to think of it as a sacrifice. It was not a sacrifice. It was literally my choice to gain knowledge of what freedom from suffering can look like. What is suffering based on? I don't know myself. What am I? What is myself? I'm nature. Oh, I haven't been hanging out in nature enough, so let's get close to nature. Well, if I have a house and all this shit to take care of, how much time am I going to have to live in nature? So it's a very practical choice, and I'm not suggesting everyone will want to do that. But if they do want the value of these teachings to be embedded in their soul and spirit and being in order to share them authentically, there will be a priority shift. What are your values? Do you just want to live in a nice house and a nice thing like that? Is that what you want? Perfect to do that. But just know that there's a cost. There's a cost to the whole global, existence. When we push our ideas of what, our comforts, our personal, gain, when we push them out into the world, which everyone is doing, of course, with modernization, everyone can live, with a nice thing. Absolutely. We all want to have that. It's presented as acceptable and normal and natural and healthy to have all the comforts around us. It's just been such a short-lived journey of it. And within these very, very short, 100 years or whatever, we've seen devastating effects. So just, I'm wondering if you're actually seeing what I'm talking about in terms of the insustainability of that being a priority.
Definitely. I just recognize my nature.
Absolutely.
What I actually...
It's not your nature, but your conditioning. Yeah.
Well, yes, my conditioning.
Sure.
And for me to think about releasing all of that right now would not be easy for me. And
Sure.
I think that, when I'm trying to think about it in a practical way, right?
Yes, people can make money. Yeah.
Because let's face it, very few people will actually do what you did. And also the way that you're living now is also different. And this place, it gives a lot, but it also gets a lot, right? So there's like a very dynamic flow of energy going through this place. And I think it's important to talk about that and not just about the ideal, how it should be,
Yeah. Well, the modern, whatever you're saying, it's very difficult to let go. It's very hard to let go of how we're bound to the idea of our existence looking a certain way. It's a very challenging thing to question. What is our part? What's our part in the whole picture? And
let go of comfort.
To be free of that is massive. If you have the interest to be free, that's number one. Number one, and for me, I'm talking about if I'm looking at society's attachment to personal, pleasure and personal entertainment and personal, whatever it is, just self first. This is the issue. The issue of, if you're talking about why we're even doing this podcast, is because they're suffering at such a deep level. People have misrepresented themselves to be these individual, sort of pillars of need. That's not what we are. We're like a completely interdependent, completely interconnected web of support. That if we can drop down below what we've been taught and actually relate to each other in a very sort of, it's a sensitive and humble and very selfless way, and we don't look so much to what I can get out of this. We'll gain what we actually are looking for, which is deep fulfillment, deep success, deep feeling. of I could die tonight and I've gained everything I've needed. Because that's what we project on all the pleasures of life, is this feeling that I could die tonight and I've been successful or whatever. I'm paraphrasing for some people, but like there's a sense that I want to be that.
I feel it from my ego. I know it's coming from my ego. That's the thing.
Sure. Exactly. And we're doing everything we can, of course, to be free of identifying with that, which is misguiding us, So in a very practical sense, if you want to make money teaching yoga, then you've missed the point. You just unfortunately have missed the mark, because if you flip it, I want to teach yoga. I want to teach yoga and I make money, then, great, it happens. But if I want to teach yoga so that I can make money and get what I need, then we've missed it. That's just not it. It's going to manifest in the Western product of yoga, and it's going to continue this misrepresentation of the potential that it offers. It's going to misrepresent it to the whole world, because we are a force of nature, the West. We present it in digital format, we present it to the whole world. And so to stay with some semblance of respecting the truth of its power to free us from that self-absorbed mode, it takes some responsibility, it takes some sacrifice in some way. Now, I'm not living in a tent anymore. I'd probably be happier living in a tent in some way, because I've done that. I have a nice house and I feel comfortable and everything like that, but I'm still doing the same work, and so it doesn't really matter. It's just more shit to take care of. So if we can free ourselves, if we can know that we're practicing yoga, teaching yoga, loving each other in order to fulfill ourselves, in order to fulfill the whole, in order to meet that need of the society, which is not going to be material gain. It's not going to be comforts. It's not going to be entertainment. That's just a story. It's an unfortunately very deeply ingrained story. We see it in the studies that show that the view of our neighbors is making like 30% more than they are. Everyone thinks that the neighbors are making 30% more than they are.
The grass is greener.
Yes. Everyone else is better. We don't see the reality is, how can we support each other, not how can we get up. It's such a distorted reality that we've been taught to live in. So we're just misguided very deeply. And I think this discussion of sharing and teaching yoga in a practical way is important. But I just want to inspire as many people as I can to look much deeper than this as a business. It is, of course, a way that you can exchange with the world around you and support some life experience, but if you put pressure on it to provide some ideal standard of living and I've seen a lot of this, and there's no easy way to talk about this, but the idea of manifesting, like I can manifest wealth and riches and everything like that. And through my yoga practice, yes, you become infinitely powerful if your practice is sincere. If you go very, very deep, you'll realize limitless potential and power. But that doesn't mean that that's going to provide any deep or lasting freedom or happiness. In fact, just because you can manifest a certain lifestyle standard, and do that, yes, absolutely, you may be able to do that within 3 months. If you really, really, really put your mind to it and really this is what I want. This is the type of house I'm going to manifest. This car on this street in this neighborhood. We can manifest. And I hear a lot of people masking selfish, very diluted ideas about what's going to make them actually deeply fulfilled with the idea of yoga or spirituality. And it's very unfortunate, because it's like using religion as a justification for abuse,
which has happened many, many times,
happening as we speak. And so using religion or using yoga, using such subtle and powerful and valuable experience to mask self-motivated gain is one of the most disappointing things that could happen, I think, because I'd rather you say, I just want to be a damn millionaire. I just want to be rich and famous.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do whatever it takes to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that would be making me so happy, rather than saying, oh, you know, I'm manifesting through my yogic powers the abundance that I deserve.
Mm-hmm.
Watch out for that. Be very, very watchful of that idea that, you know, I'm going to get what I deserve through my yoga practice. Yes, we deserve everything. But projecting it into some material manifestation has been a very diluting process for many, many people. And it's not it. Yeah, you can get whatever you want. That doesn't mean that you're going to experience success, real success.
Internal success. Yeah.
So having some idea of what you really, really are motivated by is a very important part of this. And not knowing ourselves, our insecurities, our triggers, our deepest self-beliefs, not having real awareness of those has set us up, has set people up, has set us up for not knowing what's motivating us.
Mm-hmm.
So I think personal practice, at the end of the day, knowing oneself has everything to do with a very successful experience of teaching yoga.
How do you define success?
Going to bed at night knowing if I don't wake up, I've done everything I could.
Mm. It's beautiful. I guess for my final inquiry, because I need a moment to take that in, because it's really beautiful what you just said, that we mask our egoic motivations as I deserve it because I'm a spiritual being. Yeah. And that's really missing the mark. What have you learned for over all these years of having this yoga school and meeting so many people with so many different motivations?
We're all the same. We're all just doing our best. We're all just trying to make sense of a very interesting and very complex human experience. And when we gather together with some humility to the grandeur, to the bigger view, and become more receptive to that, we will notice what we seek, those things we seek have always been within us. We'll notice that the not knowing has been the fuel, you know, the curiosity about what is going to fulfill me. That has been the fuel to direct our attention to a source experience. And everyone's doing their best to do it in their own way. Mm-hmm. And that's what I've learned. I've learned that everyone's just trying to be happy. Everyone's just trying to make sense of this whole wild human thing. And that I have a lot of faith in humanity, tremendous faith in the human capacity for growth and for change and for adjustment. And that I've also learned that I am part of something bigger. And it's not about me, and it's not about my personal place or something like that. That I'm part of something that flows through each of us and meets in the center of the circle when we're willing to let go of those things that we're taught were so valuable. Mm-hmm. Not to say that they go away, but that we release our grip.
Yeah.
And this grip on what we think it is, what we think happiness, fulfillment, deep understanding is going to look like. Mm-hmm. Then we can function, then we can actually do stuff and really be practically beneficial in the world, rather than holding so dearly to who I thought I was, what I thought I needed, what I thought I should have gotten, what I deserved, whatever this child aspect of ourselves learned that it was supposed to act like, isn't actually the case. You know, the child doesn't have to live through us as an adult. It doesn't have to make us motivated by a lack of status or a lack of love or a lack of power.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to do that.
Yeah.
It lives in us as a child, like any child would, as having needs, but those needs aren't going to be from out there. They're going to be from right here to in here.
We have all the answers that we're looking for.
We do.
Yeah. So I'll encourage anybody who's curious about inner child play, as Christopher calls it,
Yes.
to listen to the previous episode that we recorded together. There's a lot of great insight there about how to approach that and how to work with that really as a self-therapy in a way. So that's a really, really great recording that we made that Christopher gave.
Co-created.
Yeah. And thank you so much, Christopher. I'd just like to finish with this question that I always ask. What are you curious about right now?
Honestly, I'm curious about how this last sort of hour or so of talking will have an impact, if any, on the people that listen to it. And beg understanding that my experience of this perhaps has been unusual, but I don't think that it's unreasonable, and not to suggest poverty is the way we should live, but simply to release our ideas of what society should look like for it to be successful and to be sustainable.
Incredible. So if anybody wants to contact Christopher, maybe dive deeper into any of these subjects, of course, he leads trainings here at Yandara. I'm sure you can write an email if you have any questions to the Yandara email address. And he also has Instagram, right? Shane Christopher Perkins. And I'm sure you can reach him there. So thank you so much, Christopher.
Of course, it's a pleasure. And everyone, in my view, deserves everything that they could possibly want. And I hope that you out there feel supported by the universe, and what you're offering comes back tenfold to touch your heart, to fill your world, so you can sleep well at night.
Amen.
That's all it's about.
Now, after this time to nurture your mind and your spirit, we invite you to take a moment to consider others. A kind wish might come to mind. Know that what we learn becomes more valuable when we apply it and share it with others. So share this episode on Instagram stories, tag Yandara and I, or share with a loved one so that more people can benefit from it. Our hope is that the search will lead you home to who you already are, to what was always there. We'll be back next week with more inspiration, honest conversation, and insight into the energetic world around us. Thank you for listening and watching.